Alright, so in this session I just wanted to discuss uh, compositing your character to the background and just a couple of tips and tricks. So one of the first things was, of course, that some of you do use different software. This is mainly for Photoshop, although some of this stuff can actually be translated over to different software. With Photoshop, there are certain features that you can't really get in other bits of software. So one of the first things that's probably an advantage in terms of using Photoshop is the fact that you can group layers. So some of the new software now tends to support this kind of same feature. I think what's the other one? I don't think Sketchbook supports grouping, or maybe it does. I think the latest version does support grouping. I know that Krita does, so Krita supports layer grouping. The great thing about layer grouping is that you could, so if you're not using Photoshop, you're using other pieces of software, if you've got layer grouping, you should be able to move that whole group across from one file to the other. So you can see that I've got these two here. I could view them side by side in Photoshop by tiling them. So now I've got both of them there, and I can drag and drop just using my move tool set to auto select a group, and I should be able to move it from one to the other like that, right? So that's pretty helpful to be able to do that. The problem with this is that it's a group of raster images. So if I was to focus on this one, I could scale it, and I'm just using the shortcut key Control T for PC, Command T for Mac. So I could scale this. In the latest version of Photoshop, you just have to scale it down, and it scales it down proportionally. In older versions of Photoshop, you need to hold down the Shift key. So say I wanted to put my character here, I've scaled it. Now if you're happy with that and you're not going to go back, then that's fine, you've got no problems. But what if you wanted to increase the size? Now if I wanted to increase the size again, I would have lost all the data that's associated with this character. So say I wanted to make him big enough that you can see, say, his head and the rest of his body's cut off or something like that. My image will come out blurred because it's lost all that information. Right, so the whole point of Photoshop is that things can be done non-destructively. So I'll go back so you can see this character here. Just to show you the difference, what I'll do is I'll make a duplicate of that group. So I'll call this group dumb, so this will be the dumb layer, standard layer, and this group I'll call smart. Okay, and so what I'll do is I'll convert this layer into a smart layer. Right click, convert to smart object. So we've got two of the same thing. It's just that one is a group of layers, as you can see here. They're all raster, and this is a smart layer. So I'm going to hide the smart layer for the moment, and I'll do the same thing, just exaggerate it a bit. So say I wanted to scale this down to like a really small size like that. So I'll hit return, and what Photoshop has done is it's removed the pixels that make up that image when I resized. So what's going to happen is if I try and rescale this back up again, it's lost that data, so the image is blurred. Right, so this is why I call this a dumb layer. Right, so this is a smart layer. So the smart layer retains information, so I can resize this to really small like that, And if I resize it back again to about the original size, you'll notice there's no loss of data. That's because the smart layer actually saves this file separately. I'll just go back to your view here. So that's my character 1, and this is the smart layer here. Right? And it's saved it as a PSB. This is a different file format that the Adobe have come up with for files that need to be larger than 5 gig. But the other advantage to this is that when you create a smart layer like this, this file actually gets saved automatically into your hard drive, somewhere in your hard drive. If I was to go and save as, you can see that it's saving it into a temporary location. It's app data local temp. So it retains the original information. So you could do anything you wanted to this object here. I could convert this into a grayscale. I don't want to merge. Don't merge. Don't want to rasterize. I want to discard. And although this image is grayscale now, if I double click it, the original is not. Alright, so it's a smart layer in that sense. I'll just undo. Okay, so the first thing I would do with my character is make it into a smart layer before I drag it in. So now I can drag that into my environment, and I'll move it across. Oops, I've got to switch off the group selection so that I can just select that, and this will need to go actually I think it's fine where it is, and then I can just scale this to the size that I need for my environment, which is what's required for your assessment. Okay, so we need to put the character that we drew for the last assessment, assessment 2, in. Now we need to composite it into our environment. Alright, now once we've done that, more than likely your character's not really going to match the scene. Right? The lighting's probably going to be different, and he's going to stand out. It's not going to look like he's part of this scene. So what we need to do next is we need to adjust the lighting, maybe even do a little bit of painting to make this character look like he's part of the scene. So one of the first things I would do is use an adjustment layer to try and adjust the color. Okay, so what I can do is I can add an adjustment layer through here. So I could use, say for instance, a hue and saturation, and I'll make sure that that hue and saturation only affects my character. In fact, I should really rename this to character. Right. And so if I click on this, that will let me just affect this character. If you go over the top of it, it says this adjustment clips to the layer or to affected layers below. So now if I was to move this wheel around, you can see that it's only affecting my character, and I want it to shift more towards the red. You can see it's shifting it more towards the red there, so that it kind of matches that background there, and I can increase or decrease that. Now I don't want that red to affect all of my character. I probably only want it to affect around the edges. So what I might do is I might use a layer mask. Actually, I already have the layer mask. The layer mask is there. I'm going to use a standard brush. So in this case I would be using a soft general brush, just a rounded one. I'll just zoom in. So I would kind of only allow this effect, this lighting effect, to occur in certain regions. What I like about the mask is that I can switch, drop my brush size, and I can kind of add it to different parts of my painting, and I can cut it out in certain areas as well. So I definitely don't want it like taking over the skin too much. Maybe softly remove it from here. Their shoes are way too red. Oh. Now what's going on? It somehow jumped on me. I think I've accidentally made it jump. Pilot shadow. That needs to go. Character. There we go. And, of course I can go in and retouch this as I go. Maybe add a little bit softer lighting in here. Again, so our aim here is to make it kind of match our scene. The other thing you could do as well is, so I'm going to add to the character itself, I'm going to add a filter. So under render there's a filter called lighting effects. Again, probably because I've got that adjustment layer set, I probably might not need that, but just to show you. So with this I can actually increase or decrease the intensity of that light. And so if my light was actually coming from, say, top left here, I could move this around to create that kind of lighting effect. So I could do something like that, for instance. We can change the color. So the color I've got is kind of a red. You can see it gets stronger, so I don't really want it that strong. I want it more to the light side. Maybe something like that. And once again, we've got a mask that comes along with this as well. So if I click OK, because this is a smart layer, it actually has a sub layer given to this character under smart filters, which this is a mask, and you can see the lighting effect is there. I can switch it on and off, or I can readjust it by clicking on this. Oh, well, this is actually giving me the blending options. Double click the name and there it is, so I can go in and adjust it. So I'll cancel that. But what I can do as well is use the mask for that. I'll use a large brush because I only want it to affect from the, so I'm using black to hide the effect on the right hand side and only affect some of the left, so I'll get it to fade away from that point, something like that. Right, so we have a lot of control over lighting adjustments, and we can use filters, we can use adjustment layers, and all of these are non-destructive, so we can switch them on and off to test things. to see if it works for us. We can even change with something like this. I can change the strength by using opacity. So that allows me to change the strength a little bit. So there's a lot of control over this. And that's what Photoshop has over a lot of other programs, is that a lot of its processes are non-destructive. I do have to say that Cricut has a lot of these similar features, aside from it does not have smart objects. Who knows, one day it might, but smart objects are kind of a Photoshop only feature. The other thing we could do is we can do an effect. So say for instance we wanted to do a drop shadow. Now, there's nothing wrong with drawing or painting in a drop shadow, but one trick that you could do through Photoshop is use the drop shadow effect. So the drop shadow effect, now I've got to make sure I've got it on the right thing. I'll make sure that I've got it on the character. It's a character that I want to have that. So, and then I'll do it again, drop shadow. So if I move this across, you can see it's a flat. It's not really what we want, but it's a good starting point because it creates this kind of semi-transparent silhouette that we can use for our drop shadow. So I'm happy with it as is. I'll click OK, and it pops up just here. So you can see it under Effects, Drop Shadow. Again, it's a non-destructive feature. What I can do though is I can then convert this drop shadow into a layer. So create layer, yes, OK. So now this drop shadow is a layer. And what I can do with that is I can then go to Edit, Transform, and Distort. And so with Distort, I can squash this down and reverse it so that it's more of a shadow like that. And I can warp it and shape it to, to kind of match the surface that this character's in. So say he's kind of standing in that surface. I'd probably have to warp it a bit more to get it to sort of follow these bits of wood or whatever, but this is just an example. So from that, if I hit return, then I've got something that's a bit more like a shadow. And again, I could add a layer mask to that, and with a soft brush, just fade away where you want the shadow to kind of die off. I'm using opacity here, so I might just... And the great thing about a layer mask is that you can, if you made a mistake, you can always bring it back by switching from black to white. So switch black to white. So black will hide and white will reveal. Also, I can use opacity. Right now it's actually using fill, so I can use fill to drop that drop shadow down. So it's not, it depends on the lighting of course, but in this case I'm making it a fairly soft drop shadow. So all these kinds of effects that we're doing can really help make the character look like it's part of this background, because it matches the lighting. And of course on top of that you could just create a new layer and do a little bit of painting as well. So I could use a bit of that red or orange. I'll make it a little bit lighter. And in this case though, I'd switch to some of my art brushes. So I'd probably use the Tetsuo brush, which allows me to do kind of fine painting. And then I could go into my detail here and start adding a bit of highlight to the edges to add that little bit of detail to my character. So again, this, by going around the edges, this is kind of giving it the character that the look that it's part of this environment. So, oops, my machine's running a bit slow because I'm projecting at the moment. So, but by using that kind of stuff, adding in some kind of halos, towards the edges of your character, you're making it appear like it's more part of this environment. And it really does depend on your environment though. So if you have like blues rather than reds in your background, then you'd have more whites or very light blues as your highlights for your character. Because my character is in a background that's kind of red, like it's meant to have fire and so on and so forth on the background. That's why mine's got this kind of red, and that's why I'm using these oranges. Oranges tend to come out a lot brighter than a red does, so it seems a lot hotter as well, color-wise. So that's what I'd be using to kind of highlight these things here. You can see that the kind of effect that it makes, the highlights. So don't always rely on making your outlines dark. Look at the lighting and how the lighting would affect these lines. Alright, and that's pretty much the session that we had on Thursday. The next session that I would be talking about is your interface. I'll probably publish this online so that everyone can see it and everyone has access to this video.